Hello, everyone. I thought I would do an in-depth analysis of the book Anna Karenina. But before I get to that, if you enjoy Tolstoy's writing, then you might enjoy my book, The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, because it has many similar themes, especially to Anna Karenina. It's also about adultery, a fallen woman, so to speak. Although this book combines elements of A Tale of Two Cities. It's essentially a combination between A Tale of Two Cities, Anna Karenina, and a little of Crime and Punishment. But if you enjoy books like this, then I also think you would enjoy a book like The Ecstasy and the Ignominy as well. So I just thought I would get that out of the way really quickly. So the book Anna Karenina is one of my favorite novels, even though it is translated. And being translated, some of the rich language will obviously be lost because I don't read Russian. But I do think this translation is quite good. I think that some of Tolstoy's poetic flair is left intact. Even though it is somewhat simplistic compared to books that aren't translated, I think that poetic flair is still there in spots, especially when, and I know this is going to be a spoiler, but especially when Anna dies. I think that is described very well, and there are also certain passages that have to do with describing springtime. I love those passages. And I think Tolstoy, if the translations are accurate, was a better writer in terms of description than someone like Dostoevsky, who I haven't read as much of, so I may alter my opinion on that later. But Dostoevsky, from what I've read of him, he's more simple and matter of fact, whereas Tolstoy likes to play around with language a bit more. And some people consider Tolstoy to be the Russian Shakespeare, and I might actually share that sentiment. He deals with themes on such a level that only Shakespeare rivals him in that regard. And of course, the story of Anna Karenina is about a woman called Anna Karenina. And I will say, I've read Anna Karenina before, but this is just a more in-depth analysis. I've reviewed it before. But Anna Karenina is essentially, she is a woman who feels very stifled in her life. She is a woman who is married to a man who is an aristocrat, and he is very stringent, very strict, and very cold towards her. And so she falls for a man named Vronsky, a soldier who she believes has legitimate passion for her in a way that her husband does not. Of course, her love affair with him is not as innocent as that. She also is attracted, I believe, to his status as a soldier, and his rogue status, I believe, is very appealing to her because it creates he represents a life of freedom that she doesn't have in her own life. So they begin an affair, which in late 19th century Russian society especially was a scandal. And and this is one thing that isn't talked about as much in a lot of discussions of Anna Karenina, is that the characters are a product of the environment in which they live, because this was about 40 or so years before the Russian Revolution, the Communist Revolution, where the royals were overthrown. And you can tell that even just a few decades before, that there is a breakdown in the trust of the institutions, that people feel stifled by the world in which they live, the strict codes that they are supposed to enforce, the strict honor that they're supposed to adhere to. And Anna Karenina is caught up in this world where she is being pulled between her duty as a wife and that strict culture and rigid culture that she lives, and her passions and that new culture, which is more secular. And so you have a clash of worldviews here, and she's being pulled in different directions, which ultimately leads to her nihilism and to despair, because she is being torn in all sorts of different directions, and she does not feel truly free, truly liberated. And the weight of those opposing cultures, those things essentially cause her tragic fate, because she cannot cope with the tumultuous world around her. And I don't think that Tolstoy, in that sense, really judges Anna per se. I think that he lets her live as a free and a real human being that makes choices without judgment. Even though Tolstoy himself was quite religious and quite conservative. I mean, not in his own day, but he would be considered now. And so she lives as a real human being. In some sense, I would say that Anna is the most real and the most layered character I think that I've ever encountered in anything that I've ever read. She is a character who truly comes to life, and I don't think the book endorses her choices, but I think that it asks us to feel sympathy for people who are caught up in a world that they don't truly understand, and that they find oppressing. But at the same time, I think that the book is a warning that you should also not give in fully to your passions, because even though certain moral codes can be stifling, they exist for a reason as well. And so I think ultimately it's about creating balance between those two things, which you find in the character of Levin and Kitty. And Levin is just as important as a character as Anna Karenina, but the book could just as easily be called Levin, and you wouldn't be deceived. But his storyline is somewhat separate from Anna's, and in many of the film adaptations, you don't see Levin depicted as much because it's not as dramatic, his story. But Levin experiences a crisis of faith himself, where he doesn't see meaning in the world and all he sees is hypocrisy. But what Levin comes to realize towards the end, and this is really the philosophical heart of the book, because just very briefly, he was going to marry this woman named Kitty, or that was her name. I mean, I might be pronouncing her name wrong, but that's how I think her name is pronounced, or her nickname anyway. But then she rejects him for Vronsky. But then of course he ultimately has a relationship, an affair with Anna Karenina, but then Levin is saying, well, why should I be with her? She rejected me. But in the end, he ultimately reconciles with Kitty, and what he ultimately comes to see is that what gives life meaning is a transcendent relationship with God, but an honest and legitimate one, not one that is determined by a society or culture. It's a personal relationship, and that is how one finds happiness and contentment, not so much in passionate relationships, as seductive as those can be, and not in the rigid expectations in society. You have to transcend that. And to me, that is the ultimate message of Anna Karenina. It's about transcending the expectations placed upon us so we can find true spiritual fulfillment. So that is my analysis of Anna Karenina.